All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for showing up, and I hope you're having a really good festival so far. So my name is Cyntha Wieringa. I work at the Ars Electronica Futurelab, so I belong to this exhibition that you see over here. The last 3 years, I've also been the project manager of the Sharespace project. And basically within this project, we've had the honor of developing some art pieces for the Deep Space 8K. So what we want to do here today with this talk is we want to sit down with the artists who have worked with us over the last year, ask them a bit about their piece, how they have incorporated some of these Sharespace thoughts and ideas and technologies into their work. And yeah, and then also, of course, have the opportunity to ask them whatever you want to ask them. So I will first give you a very short introduction into Sharespace and what the project is about, and then we will dive into their developed pieces. So Sharespace is a 3-year Horizon Europe research project, so it's funded by the European Commission. We have done it together with 14 partners all over Europe. And the idea is that it aims to push the boundaries of embodied collaboration by the development of new extended reality technology. So what exactly embodied collaboration means, I will get into in a bit. So it's quite an interdisciplinary project, and in the end, the ideas and the technologies are tested in 2 what we call proof of principles. So these are kind of scientific principles that are being tested. And then we will have, it is also then tested in 3 pilots, it's called. So real world scenarios, and us at the Ars Electronica Futurelab, we were doing one of these applications. So what exactly is embodied collaboration? So what we mean is this is having a body in a digital space. So within the project, we are using avatars. And so it's the way that we mean it is that we collaborate between human and avatars in shared hybrid spaces. So hybrid spaces, both digital and physical. And embodied collaboration, so we are not necessarily focusing on collaborating through speech, but we're really focusing on collaborating through movement. So the 2 scientific principles, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but just so you have a general idea of what we're trying to do. So the first one is called synchronization, and this is quite obvious. When we move in sync with others, we also feel more connected to them. So what we do in the project is we just see if this principle also translates to the digital realm. So when we have these shared hybrid spaces and we also move in sync with our avatars, do we also get this idea of social connectedness amongst them? The second idea is a bit more technical, so it's called amplification. And the idea here is that when we move, actually our intention in our movements is they call it encoded in the movement. So we as humans might not always observe our intention, but what if we use, let's say, AI technologies, they might be able to recognize this intention a bit earlier. And when we amplify this intention in a digital space, does it therefore also make it easier to understand this intention? So if we amplify intense movement in digital spaces, can we then also understand them easier? So these principles have been tested in 3 applications. So the first one is health. So they have been running tests at a hospital in Spain that is about the XR rehabilitation of low back pain. So they've been doing exercises with experts in low back pain, and they also still aim to do a trial with people that are actually suffering from low back pain. And the idea is just around usability. So can we use this technology to study this? So we have done a usability study, and we have presented it last year at the World Congress of Pain, which I have never heard about before, but apparently within pain research, it's a very big thing. The second one is an XR application in cycling, so we've used it in sports. So what we have done is we want to use an XR application to see if we can recognize attacks. So attacks within the cycling sport, this is basically a sprint, let's say. So the idea is that we try to recognize when a person is initiating this sprint, amplifying this information, and then seeing if we can actually train cyclists to detect this earlier and earlier. So this is a study that we also presented at the Olympic Games last year in Paris. So that was really quite a good result. And lastly, what we are doing here at the Futurelab is we are artistically exploring Sharespace concepts. So the first two are quite top-down. Let's say it's very pre-planned, but what we are doing is the opposite of that. So we are looking at these concepts, we're looking at this technology, and we think, what can we do with this? It's really about free explorations of this. So we have done these explorations internally at the Futurelab. So we've had developers at the Futurelab making artworks for the Deep Space 8K. And what has been really, really cool about this project is that we've also had open calls. So we had open calls where we also asked completely external artists, hey, do you have a cool idea? Do you want to do something with this? So last year we presented 3 artworks at the festival. This year we've presented 2 artworks at the festival. And yeah, we will dive a bit deeper into those. But very quickly a rundown of the ones that we made last year. So the first one is called Converge. So we adapted it one this year again. And what we've done here is that you see this very large avatar in the middle. That's a live mocapped performer. And you see that also the people on the deep space floor, they have their own avatars as well. And the remote actor and the local actors have to collaborate together to solve social puzzles. The second artwork we made is called Falcon Heavy. And this was all based on this principle of synchronization. So we asked people on site in the deep space to synchronize with each other, and based on their synchronicity, we created an audiovisual experience for them. And the last one was the project that we made together with an external artist team. This was a young artist group, and they made. Yeah, well, it was a live action boss battle, video game boss battle, basically. So they had a mocap performer in the space that you see over there, who was embodying a giant avatar, and the people on the deep space floor had to collaborate together to make their way through the experience. If you want to know more about any of these, we have a booth right outside. There's some videos showing there as well. And of course, afterwards, we will be around and you can ask us anything about these. But without further ado, I would like to jump into the works of the artists that are here. So I will give the microphone to Patrick and we can talk about Converge.
Right, thank you, Cyntha. Yeah, I'm Patrick Berger. I'm artist at the Futurelab since 2016, for quite some time already, and I've done some projects in real-time applications and hybrid spaces. So, and last year I already made Converge 1 in collaboration with others, and this year Converge 2, it's extension and update of the existing Converge, and I'll just go over what has changed and just basically the concept behind it. So, as Cyntha already mentioned, in Converge 2 the collaboration is very, very important. So without communicating between the deep space and our motion captured actor, the progression through this experience is really not possible. So it needs around 4 local participants in deep space to help the remote player along. They need to collaborate to persevere, and it's conceptually it's supposed to raise questions about social isolation and how, if at one point humanity technologically reaches a stage where they can communicate like body language and actual human emotion flawlessly across time and space, what that could mean, and also maybe the dangers of it, especially if you consider that you could, in theory, use the data, like physical data and emotional data, also for maybe not malicious intent. So this is our motion capture actor, Victor. Maybe you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, I'm Victor. You can see me here on the screen. I was the motion capped person in this for Converge 2, and yes, I think that was introduction from me. I think it was a very interesting experience to also do this and also be performing in a kind of hybrid space, which was very new for me. And yes, that's kind of my perspective, and I will share also some thoughts later on.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah. just a quick overview of the general game mechanics. So the remote person has holes beneath their hands. So anywhere the hands are moving, the holes are underneath. And then there's also this component of NPCs, so AI avatars that are raining from the sky and just storming towards these holes to their certain doom. And the more that fall in, the larger the holes grow, and eventually they consume everything in the scene. But the local players in Deep Space, they're able to deflect or save these AI avatars. Eventually, the holes kind of heal. The wounds of the remote player, they heal, and they become one again. Just from a technical perspective, an update to last year was that we introduced voice communication. So in this version, the motion capture actor could actually talk to the local players in Deep Space. We saw the need for that because last year there was a bit of moderation necessary to kind of explain to local players what to do. We wanted to avoid this time and really implement this into the story, which worked quite well. This year we already saw that the local players can really, they knew exactly what to do at each moment, so that worked well. Also, there's an added amplification, so there's 2 scenes. I'll show you. I'll go a quick run through the story later, but at one point in the experience, the extremities of the motion capture actor grow, so the gestures are really amplified. The holes are harder to control. The locals have a bit of a harder time. But in this scenario, the amplification is kind of a thing that makes things more difficult. But of course, this principle itself can really make intentions, as Cyntha mentioned, clearer and maybe sometimes even change their meaning altogether. And just a quick overview of the art style. So because I already mentioned a bit about social isolation, and I wanted to kind of show kind of the main character's despair a bit. So I went a bit into this distorted look. Comparison to last year was we went from a bit of a minimal style where the idea originally was to go very flat, which in a 3D cinema kind of like Deep Space AK didn't work that well, but the intention of this minimal style was to have like maybe explore if movement and people can be recognized just by their silhouette. But this year we went more 3D and more despair and more glitchy for Converge 2. So these are just a couple of mood renderings. And yeah, just again, these are these 3 components. There's a remote player to the left with this empty robe, the local players in the middle, and the AI NPCs to the right. And it was important for me to have these avatars. Like they're supposed to represent kind of instances of the same entity. So they're supposed to find back together. So I wanted not to be very specific, either gender-wise or even size-wise or identity-wise. This is why they're basically just hollow robes, right? That they have no face. They're just walking temporary bodily forms. So in the beginning of the story, there's this unity, but entropy kicks in and everything kind of descends to chaos. And out of this, the main character is born. And then within this void, the character tries to, find some sort of connection again. But is sucked back into the void, and these blobs on the floor you see are then possessable by the local players in Deep Space. So these players are then intended to come together, form this light, illuminate the space, and find back to the remote player. So collaborate. Eventually, the screen whitens and reveals the remote player again. And just when you think all is good, he falls out of the sky and falls into this very dystopic landscape. The local players in Deep Space get kind of a humanoid form, can experience how it is to run around with their avatars, but then the next bad thing happens, namely the remote player grows, and the AI NPCs start falling from the sky and trying to enlarge in the holes. But as you can see here, then the locals get these this aura, so with their light that worked before to save kind of the remote player, they can also save or deflect the AI NPCs from the holes, and eventually they shrink, and it works out to merge back together. There's the additional scene with the extended arms, and when at the end basically everyone's saved and the remote player finds back to the light, and kind of the light then consumes everything. Yeah, that's it for the story.
Great, yeah. Thank you very much. I think we will perhaps dive immediately in also the next piece, and after that I think we want to have an open discussion with everyone, so save your questions for after that. So thank you very much to Patrick and Victor, who were these internal researchers that are both active at the Futurelab. And the next ones are Leon Butler and Peter Power, and they made their piece Foolish Flame by applying to the open call that we opened last year. And yeah, it was very exciting to work with you, so I'll give the word to you.
Thanks, Cyntha. I'm Leon Butler. I'm an artist and a lecturer in Atlantic Technological University.
And I'm Peter Power, and I work. I was originally a biochemist, and then I got into something else, and now I'm here as a transdisciplinary artist and making strange things in Austria.
All interesting routes lead to Ars Electronica, it seems. So thanks to everyone for coming, and thanks to the team who are here as well working on this. So yeah, Foolish Flame was a transdisciplinary project that we did with co-commissioned by Ars Electronica, working with Futurelab on this Sharespace project. And it was really interesting to kind of see the call come out, because we'd worked on a few projects in the past that were kind of in this area, and stuff about them kind of resonated because we'd gone through some stuff. So we made a VR work called Emperor 101, which is a really interesting work. We made it with Joe Mangan, who's here as well, and Tom Swift, and Peter and myself. And because it was in a headset, we did all this work, and not that many people saw it, right? Because you can maybe like have like a few people through, and even when we were at the briefing for Ars Electronica, they were saying like it's still tough with VR to get a volume of people through. So we didn't have this feeling of people having a social experience together. They weren't having, you know, shared experience. So when we saw the call and it was talking about the shared experience and amplification, we had kind of looked at that. So the work we made after this really kind of followed on from Emperor. We made a piece called Dwelling that was about isolation and being alone and being in your room. And it was kind of post-pandemic, where you were kind of working, taking a Zoom call, everything happened in one kind of space and you lived in there inside your mind. So this work was, you know, there was 100 people in the audience for this, and there was a virtual screen there and a live dancer. And so we had that kind of shared experience and amplification, and people took something from it. So it was kind of a follow-on from those two projects, I think, to make this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was important, originally actually Dwelling was going to be a VR work, and we were about, I'd say 8 months into the dev kind of process, and we realized that we couldn't make the aspect of entering the headset work emotionally. We couldn't get it into the work without having someone at the start fussing and doing this. We wanted all of it to kind of flow, and we realized that at like 4 months out that we had to dump that entire idea, and it was terrifying, really, you know, because you know you're imagining it being this thing, and we shifted the perspective of the virtual into this mirrored wall, which sort of would reflect her real life, but then we would augment it by overlaying these sort of hallucinations across that wall in real time. And it was in 4 acts, and it started with this night. She goes to sleep and she has a sort of nightmare that you witness, and then she wakes into her working day where she gets attacked by like a constant stream of social media. And then the 3rd act was this sort of dream sequence where she stares at a window and she kind of dreams of an alternate life. And then it ended with her meeting the person she dreamt of in real time, and that wall became an azure kind of motion track of her, and she dances with herself. And so then when the piece ended, the audience could step up, and it was actually an installation, so it ran as its own installation as well. And so this idea of like witnessing it being performed in, by a group and then allowing the group to perform themselves. And this in and out thing has been quite important in our stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like, going to Deep Space and hearing about the Sharespace project, it really kind of resonated with us. And we went into the space and we're like, this is a totemic big wall, very hard to fill, but it was like, big blank wall, and very exciting to kind of to start doing that. So this is some of the environments that we're using for dwelling, and some of the kind of characters that she duets with and kind of works with. So a lot of this aesthetic kind of came over into some of the world from Foolish Flame. And so things that we were looking at in this were kind of thinking about like audience agency and how the climate emergency is affecting us all, and can we have this cathartic experience together if we experience something and go through it. So this kind of cause and effect going back and forth, and the audience kind of feeling that they go on a journey of kind of rebirth within it. And so this was our kind of our research question, if you want to say that. So it's how our inherited traumatic relationships to cultural and environmental heritage can affect our sensitivities and awareness of our impact on them. And so we drew on our heritage as Irish people and our kind of post-colonial sort of experience of that. And we had this thought of boglands or wetlands being an amazing sort of space for biodiversity, but they're sometimes, especially in Ireland, they're considered scrubland or bad areas where we were kind of pushed to make subsistence of, and but they're also a place that store memory. They're a place that kind of hold things. So we wanted this kind of idea of storage and working through the landscape and working back through time, because they're built up over thousands of years. So how we can fall back through that memory and look at that. And we did that in the picture, but also in looking at the heritage of the music and the song and the dance that we worked on with it.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too dark at like 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock in the day, Ireland has had a rough time, you know, as a culture, and we're coming out of that period confused as to who we are, and there's a lot of our heritage is as fragile as the climate. That's what it feels like sometimes. Like we're always in a process of loss, and in the music particularly, and in the dance, the music, the instrument we use is an instrument called the uilleann pipe, and the uilleann pipe is a very particular Irish bagpipe, if you want to call it that. But its history is that it sounds quieter than a lot of the other bagpipes in the world, and the reason is that we designed it so that it couldn't be heard by British occupiers. So we would play it indoors, and so it has this quietness in it, which when I discovered this, I got really kind of annoyed at that. And so in the piece, the uilleann pipe is blown up to this massive volume, and I was working with this uilleann pipe player, and she found that process very emotional. There's also a song in the work which is one of our funeral songs that we sing when we're passing over the dead. And Ireland has had to come up with extremely community-based ceremonies of death. There's been quite a lot of death in our culture, and so we have these sort of collective explosions of catharsis called wakes, and we sort of do them together. And this is one of the songs we would sing, and it can be part of a process called keening. And keening comes from the Irish cuina, which is essentially crying, you know. And so there's a keening song in the piece which is crying for the death of the environment, or as we phrased it, on the nature of loss, or the loss of nature. And then the dance itself that's in the piece, that's hidden in the characters that you occupy in the central section, is actually based on a form of dance called sean-nós, which is a really old Irish form of dance. And we gave that piece of dance to a Irish contemporary dancer to reinterpret. And so you've got this ancient form, this contemporary interpretation, all fed into a training system that outputs an opportunity for the audience to be amplified and become a dancer. So you whatever way you move, it amplifies your dance and reaches into the data set to kind of show you a much more augmented version of your own body, and that's placed into our culture. And the reason for all that was we felt our heritage was fragile, and it was important to present it in a way, in a story of fragility.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's kind of in like 3, kind of 4 acts that we had it. So they kind of bear witness to 2 worlds. You start in a reality, and by affecting certain things within that, you get kind of shunted into a dream world, into a cloud world that you can access the kind of memory moving through landscape and moving through time, and then you access this ability to dance. And then, you know, from that you bear witness to this foolish flame who is trying to warn you about the environmental damage that you're doing, even unbeknown to yourself. And that brings you through to the kind of end is, you see a world that's been completely extracted. The color is gone, the life is gone from the first world, and you're kind of in this extracted environment, and the flame is keening for a dead world, crying for the dead world. And you know, at the end, it's kind of like it has to be all burnt down to start again. So kind of like after a forest fire, things start growing again, but we need to kind of, you know, restart and reimagine how we're dealing with the world.
And just very quickly to say, that is actually the process of grief, which is ultimately it ends in joy, and that was a real part of the thing for us as well, is that the piece has to end in a kind of act of joy, because that is actually how you process these things. So this is a video of us, I think, of doing some of the process, which it's not playing, but that's fine. Imagine this was a moving video of people doing cool stuff in a research room. This is actually here. And this is our uilleann pipe player, Muireann Hay. Muireann is also the singer in the piece. She is an astonishingly talented Irish musician, and you should look her album up. She's really amazing. But we oh, haha, saved. Turn it on and off again. There I am waving my hands around. This is actually the graph. This is the storyboard, and we graph our stories along emotional and sort of psychological processes. This is Robin, our dancer, who performs all of some of the motion and the reinterpretation of the AI system. This is us actually like absorbing training data from old Irish archives. That's just all of us looking terrified at the start of the project, and I'm just trying to look like I know what I'm doing. This is some of the Unreal Engine stuff that ultimately became the most difficult thing in the world. Unreal Engine is gaslighting, and I hope, just to say that out loud, but it is, and then we started to play with the interactions, the particulates, this idea of overwhelm, of this dreamscape, of this creature's emotion, you know, this idea of watching a creature die that you've accidentally killed, and then entering into this world of all of these point clouds are all points of nature. And so when they, in moments where they almost form, they show you nature that has been lost, and they explode back out into sort of memory. Yeah, and projects like this, they just take so much time and so much trial and error, and all I can really say about it now, kind of standing back, looking at it last night, is, you know, you always look at something and think, oh God, I want to change it, I want to do this and that. But actually, ultimately, I'm so proud of making a piece that tries to, without saying or having to say anything with language, a verbal language, that it tells a unified mythological story to a room about how we can lose things but find them together. And I think that's kind of what it tries to do, you know.
Yeah, and the 2 people who worked on it are over here, and so they really worked so hard on it. And the Futurelab team, where we couldn't have made it without them. They're amazing, and our producer Aisling and our producer Miles and everyone. So it was a real kind of like, we got there in the end, but there was
Emphasis on end.
and yeah. There was a lot of late nights, and at the afternoon of it got loaded onto the machine. So yeah, we crossed our fingers and showed it last night, and it's on again this evening at 6. If people want to come along, I'm not sure if there's still tickets, but you can maybe blag in.
Yes. So thank you very much for explaining that a little bit. So. Of course, I have some questions prepared here, but we also just want to have it in a bit of an open discussion format. So if anybody has any questions, please just raise your hand and we can come over.
So this is about Converge. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah. So your story, your experience deals a lot with creating connection. So I'm interested about the social dynamics that you've created. If I'm understanding correctly, in the latter part with the NPCs spawning in a way, the remote access player is the main source of danger. His actions, in a way, are the main way that the other players can can be prevented from achieving their goal. How do you feel, and what was your thought process in making the source of conflict be the actions of one of the players?
That's a very good question. Thanks for that. So the idea was that the remote player is involuntarily inflicting danger, so being sucked back into this kind of isolating void. And the NPCs I always saw like an overflow of information or like an exposure to a factor that you maybe can't control, that you maybe can control yourself. As such, yeah. So if the remote player would not do anything at all, then just keep falling and falling and falling in the nightmare. So I hope it came across a little. I hope it comes across in the piece itself that, and it's also mentioned and acted that the remote player really is doing the damage involuntarily. Yeah, and yeah, maybe.
Yes. And I think this aspect that it's the actor kind of has an involuntary damage kind of makes him also more relatable in a way. So that, you know, it's like this character from the start is kind of the only character throughout this entire kind of performance, so the audience starts to relate to this only character, and even though he does kind of do damage, he's kind of lost, and he has, you know, he's struggling, so that kind of creates empathy from the audience to actually help even though he's creating damage. Yes, that's my point of view.
Great. Then maybe I will also have a next question, because just to kind of relate it a bit more to the broader idea of the Sharespace project, because within this project there are so many moving parts, because we had, I remember we had such a hard time writing the open call itself, because we have these concepts, we have the different tech, we have all of the deep space descriptions that we have to do and the interactions that you have to do with that. So my question to everyone is a bit, how did you break that down in parts, or were there parts that were speaking to you more, or how did you what concepts inspired you in the end, or did you feel like that was the reason why we apply and this is how we are going to apply it afterwards?
I think we covered a little bit in the slides, but it's that kind of group dynamic of catharsis and going through something together. So it was the amplification sort of part and that kind of joint experience of doing something together, and it's, you know, that kind of agency to kind of change what you're doing, that it's not a fixed experience, that somehow through it you can your action and the actions of the people around you can affect it. So when we saw that in the open call, it was really exciting for us.
I mean, if I'm grasping the question, isn't how did we break down our response to the open call, and how did we fit our concept into it? I think like the open call was, I'm not trying to be like play on words, it felt quite open. I mean, there were some requirements in terms of these concepts of amplification and synchronicity, which were actually sort of they kind of created a curiosity rather than a sort of a constraint. And when we sat down and kind of pitched it to ourselves, I mean, we had a bit of a difficulty going when there was like the L1, L2, L2.5, L3 stuff. But when we kind of got our feel for what that meant, actually it became quite clear to us that what we were doing was trying to create a through line of collective experience, not just in a room, but actually through the technological hierarchies. So this idea of like having a collective experience with something that's AI derived, and that felt sort of lateral and vertical, and that was quite exciting in that sense of like, well, actually I would like to spend time with something like that rather than this idea of alienating it or sort of demonizing those ideas. And then it felt, when also this idea of the body as a language, and that spoke a lot to us about a movement and dance and music, and this idea of not requiring speech to connect. And in fact, in an event like ours, where you I have the luxury of speaking English, and most of you understand it. But it's actually nicer to dream of a world where none of that's necessary, actually. And so, like, I think that excited us too. And so, I think it just spoke to a lot of things we wanted to try and achieve. And so I think it was quite straightforward. And in the end, it felt like you were asking for a sort of poetic, collective moment. And like, I can think of no other purpose of live art than that, really. So yeah.
Definitely. Then or do you also want to? Okay, perfect. So I guess the project itself is about this embodied collaboration in these interactive environments and exploring what kind of new possibilities that gives to performance or just interactive art in general. And I think one really good example was for you, Victor was acting and he was in a room by himself in full VR, engaging with an audience that's not in the room, or what you were saying before is that you want to kind of make these shared experiences. So I just wonder if you can like share some ideas on how you think these kinds of technologies or these kinds of ideas are changing the way that people experience and interact with art.
Well, I can say from my perspective as a performer that usually in acting, people start to think, how do I handle like the audience? Like, where do I look? Do I just ignore them? Do I just pretend they're not there? Because as a character, if you're not breaking the fourth wall, then you're not really engaging with the audience like this. So mostly you're just trying to not ignore it, but really just, you're thinking about something else. But now that I felt this, that I had this experience of not having an audience at all, or not being able to see or hear anything from the audience, you really start to struggle a bit. It's like you're missing a kind of energy, I feel like, that you get at live performance, that kind of makes you act differently and also gives you more intensity of the moment. And for me, there was one very difficult thing to, I have to imagine the audience being there because I do not see it, I do not hear it. And like this in Converge, especially when then the audience became part of the play by becoming avatars, that was very relieving for me to see that, wow, people are actually there and they can actually hear me and they can actually see what I'm doing. So I think performing for these types of performances in the future is going to require a lot of different skills that performers and actors really need to find out what it takes to be able to perform in this kind of environment. Oh. Yes, and I would really like to see your perspective on this also, because you're working with performers and I was struggling so much, or not, it was okay, but I was struggling a bit, like how you handle it with directing dancers or performers, actors in this regard when they have to perform in these types of environments.
Don't mind. I mean, it is a thing, and I suppose I was one of the things I laughed at recently. I was watching one of these awful Marvel movies, and I could see the complete deadness in the actors because they weren't anywhere. They're in this green room, and someone's shouting, Thanos is swinging his hammer at you. And you can see that you have to embody a different style of performance, which almost to me feels much more theatrical than in that, because there's a line between the imagined world and the present world that is often, yes, in film, you could, there's elements of that, but theater, you really have to pull it out of your imagination as a performer. But in terms of managing the idea of performance for like almost an audienceless world, like working with the dancers and a lot of it has to go back to, and the concept has to be musical, I think is the only way I can explain it. And it has to have this sense of kind of internal structure so that you can speak to a person and say, like, in this moment, this is what's occurring, this is what's happening, this is what we're trying to achieve together. We use the term in dance called what is it? Yeah, well, dancers use phrases to dance, but I'm thinking about this idea of accumulation and discharge. This idea of bringing energy in and letting it out. And we would talk a lot about how you do that. And that's where you have to imagine it, because often the audience gives you that, because it's occurring in the moment. But you have to sort of invent a language for how you are, and I think of it like the way harmony is dissonant or harmonious. You kind of think of it that way. And so we spoke a lot to the dancers in that. Also, we used text prompt, poetry prompt, music. We also we do this process where we don't allow the iteration get ahead of the concept. So we're constantly, we kind of call it parallel creation, but the creative process is fundamentally in parallel with the technical pipeline, and you're checking in and out like almost at some points every 2 or 3 hours to try and make sure that something's not racing ahead. And that means having to fail together, like where you're telling the dancer, okay, we want to do this, and then you see that it doesn't work. So, like for instance, a simple answer to what you're saying is there was a feedback moment where we realized we would ask a dancer to respond to an idea, and then she would respond, but then we would realize that she wasn't actually imagining the constraint of the tracking system or the character. And we were like, how do we solve this? So we did things like project it on the wall and then let her play with it for a while. And in the playing with it, we realized we didn't need to tell her anything. We just needed to get out of her way, actually. And then we would discover that this would have its own language, and then it would completely change her choreography. And then this new thing would emerge, and we would move that forward. And we just kept trying to do that all the time. And I think we became our own audience in a kind of a weird way, if that makes any sense. And that's how I think we've tried to learn how to do that, is just don't let the technology bully you, and check in and check out and like observe, and then like really let performers play before you start locking things off, because ultimately, if you are actually making live performance work, that all has to sing properly. And if it doesn't, it starts to feel like ideas just pressed on other ideas, I don't know, does that answer the question? But
yeah. Does anybody else have an input on general? Okay. Then we are looking in this particular project at these hybrid spaces between digital and physical realities. Then the general question is, how do you, in your work as artists, kind of foresee this developing? Like, are there certain opportunities that it is going to create in your idea, or are there certain challenges that it will create? What's your general thoughts on this?
Maybe to build upon the previous question, I see enormous potential, but I also see the technical limitations. Of course, in the sense of not seeing an audience and so on. What I did try to do in Converge 2 was kind of simulate the audience, the scenes, the perspective. I mean, Victor was seeing the entire map from the entire world from his actual perspective with the VR headset on. But of course, this kind of immersion, let's say, is technologically just, there's still a very long way to go to actually like an actor can, I suppose, make him or herself believe something is real, but as a regular citizen, you have a harder time. If any technological barrier will rip you out of the experience. From that perspective, I think Sharespace is a pretty nice project all in all, because it really tries to overcome these barriers. So it really tries to make the technology so ubiquitous and so good that the human emotion is in the center and not really the technology. We're not there yet. There's a lot of research being done, but I see, as I'm thinking way ahead, if these developments become super good and become very much technologically in the background, I see a lot of potential to multiple scenarios to perform over different locations in such a world.
Yeah, I think it's a strange one. Probably just after you've made something, I kind of just want to go and make a chair now. Okay, kind of something that doesn't have technology in it, that I'm just like, I'll just screw it together. I know how to do it. I think Caelan's next project is he's going to work with some typewriters, and that it doesn't have anything. So he knows if a wire is loose, a wire is actually loose. You don't have to do it. So yeah, it's maybe the reaction to doing something. But I suppose like our practice is always kind of looking and being interested in technology and looking at new developments, but how that can feed into an audience experience, how can it be used in an interesting way. And I think Peter said not being overawed by the technology or getting this kind of demoitis where you go, oh, this looks so cool, I want to use the new thing. It's really, you know, sometimes it's kind of seeing that it's interesting, but how it can be used in, like with traditional narrative to tell stories or make audience feel something in a way that's interesting, that's not just using technology for technology's sake. It's trying to make the technology disappear a lot of the time and just make the audience feel something.
I think there's a thought, like I was thinking about this in the last year or so, like the kind of ultimate lie of all of this technology is that there's an infinite possibility, and that's absolutely not true. Like this is a finite technology, it's a finite space. And the infinite often brings up these kind of concepts of utopia, like anything is possible, or the dystopic, anything is possible, you know? And I think both of them are wrong, actually, in that it is, when you work in it, you realize how unbelievably constrained it is. Like it is so humbling, actually, working in it for real. And so I think the possibilities that come out of it is to move away from this sort of the hard sell of the infinite horizon that's in digital art, and more so to move into this idea of actually allowing it to be fractured and small and beautiful and damaged, and that it isn't perfect, and that it has this kind of, it's actually much more human than we think. And I think we've allowed ourselves to be framed in that, and that actually means that you can start to actually imagine things that are possible instead of being sort of swallowed in the void of the infinite. And I think that's why there's so much possibility, but it's quite attainable, and if we think of it from those perspectives, I think we're going to end up with really beautiful things that are about connecting and about embodying and about the kind of feeling of things, rather than getting kind of lost in the terror of this infinite promise, which I just don't think it really has, you know. So yeah, I look forward to us calming down a bit about it, actually, and sort of starting to really enjoy it, you know.
Yeah, very good points. Are there any other questions from the audience side?
Maybe this question for the four of you with a quick answer. If like a tech fairy came from heaven and you had one wish free of a tool that really make your life easier working in your domain, what would it be?
I wouldn't mind one of those KUKA robot arms that everyone seems to be getting. If someone wants to get me one of those,
I know the answer to this immediately. We were in development for a couple of weeks, and every now and again someone would say, what if I do this? Or how do I do this? And I just want an Alexa version that sits and listens beside me and goes, you do this. This is how you do that. Because that would just be the nicest thing in the world, instead of getting lost in like ChatGPT hallucinations. And like, I would just like an Alexa that's not trying to sell me shoes and actually just answer my questions properly. That would be really fantastic.
Yeah, I have something similar, maybe a usable Unreal Engine error log. That would help.
That all sounds very reasonable. I would like to have like a suit where you can feel texture and temperature in virtual reality. I think that would be so cool. And even better if the suit would allow me to feel like objects, virtual objects. But that's, I think, very far-fetched in the future.
Great. I saw another question back here. I'll come over.
So, listening to your entire story from your explorative phase to then the final output for both the projects, this is a hypothesis, but since I've not seen it live, the exploration obviously sounded much more interesting to view as an audience. Maybe the final piece would also be amazing, obviously, maybe after experiencing it. But do you think, this is my hypothesis, that if the audience was able to engage and collaborate or experience during the creation process, would that have been an interesting intersection of collaboration than the final, or only the final output? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes and no. So 95% of it was hardcore developing. So it's just sitting in front of the PC and trying to get the functions to work and the game loops to work and stuff like this. I'm just talking about Converge, right? But yes, I agree with you. We did some play testing, so like in our case with the local players in Deep Space, where they have to stand, how they should like interact with the entire scene. That's a very important part of it. But at that point, let's say the development is already at a point where you have a prototype at least that kind of works and that the audience can really play with. So yeah, it's definitely important to if you have an interactive piece, integrate the audience, or even like maybe non-biased people that are maybe not the audience in the end, but see what works and what doesn't. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think the nature of seeing how something's made might change the audience experience of coming to it cold. You know, that you walk in and you don't know what to expect and you see it. So I think that's a nice experience to have. And it's not always, you know, you kind of presuppose something if you know what it is and you've seen kind of behind the scenes. So trying not to give so much away, but I understand what you mean about, you know, seeing the hardship and the toil might make you feel empathy for the struggle. Might be.
I mean, yeah. Look, when you walk into like a cathedral and you look up, the architecture tells you something that you don't really need to understand how architecture works, right? This technology, because our entire lives have been bleached into screens, has started to become more and more underwhelming. And I think that that's really difficult when what you're making is, these things are extremely hard to make. And they are so challenging and so broken, actually, fractured. And they're kind of vulnerable art projects, really. So in that way, it's you're trying to awe, but there's so much resistance to that because of the interface of the screen. To answer it from a more kind of artistic perspective, I think there is a cultural moment we're in where we're including the audience too much in the process. And that might sound controversial, and I don't mean that like to say we shouldn't, but there's this the directionality of the artist's responsibility has shifted from making and then being observed to being observed making. And that's kind of strange. And that puts a lot of the agency in the limitations of the audience rather than in the artist. And I think we need to find a way to balance that healthily. And so for me, it's including the audience all the time before a thing is finished is like making a thing by committee. And ultimately, what we lose in that is surprise. And surprise is one of the most important things in art, I think. And so, like, I'm kind of 50-50 with it. I totally think it's important, but also just come and see it. You know, like, not everybody needs to know how to cook to enjoy a meal. You know, there's some of that stuff. I just think but that's not to resist the curiosity of the audience either. I don't mean to block it off. It's just I think it's a deeper question about what way in which we create an artwork and the interface in the audience, and the directionality of that is complex. You know, I think.
There's Grayson Perry kind of speaks about it in his book about two Russian artists who did a painting series called People's Choice, where they got a marketing firm to survey people in different countries and ask them what sort of paintings they liked, and they would paint it based on the audience response. And every time it was a bit of a landscape with a tree and a thing, and they were really uninteresting works, but it was like what happens when you let people in kind of too much, you know. So and Grayson was kind of speaking about it, kind of, you know, playing to the crowd sometimes can make your work a bit more kind of average in terms of that.
Just very quickly, I don't. That's not the audience don't understand either. What I mean is that sometimes the process is private, and that's all it is. There's a privacy to it, and I think because it is often an accident, or it's just this sort of very naked thing. And I don't know, I think we've just become too obsessed with seeing everything. And I just don't know about that anymore. I think I'd like to get back a little bit of that hiddenness, so that what I share in that moment is I'm ready to share it then. That's what I just think that idea of privacy in making, that's what I'm asking the audience to trust me with. That's all it really is about. But I do really believe we're struggling in this forum because people are just like, anyway.
Great. I think with that, unfortunately, the time is over for today, but I'm sure that they are around for a bit if anybody still has questions, just come up to us. But thank you all very much for joining this talk today. Thank you to our speakers.
Thanks, Cyntha.
And I wish you a very nice rest of your festival day or general festival. So have a nice day. Bye-bye.